If you're like me and you have a collection you haven't touched for a while and you check a few cards, you might find that they're worth some money, maybe a lot of money. And if you're like me, that will scare you. Chances are that your homeowner's insurance won't cover them without spending a ton of extra cash, so you're going to have to live with the risk of them being stolen, burned, flooded, or who knows. Combine that with the idea that I could make some money and get some rare cards into the hands of people who would appreciate them, and there's no downside to selling other than figuring out how to actually do that. So what's the best way to sell them? How do you stay safe from scammers when you do? These are questions which I spent some time investigating before putting cards online, and then, combined with the experience that I've had along the way, I made nearly $40,000 in my first year. And it was just in time, too. The minivan we bought in 2005 was never that great and only grew more dilapidated and awful over the next 15 years. More importantly, my wife had dreamed about owning a truck since she was a teen, and I finally, after more than 25 years of marriage, had enough cash to make that wish come true. I don't know what your goals or dreams are, but if you've also decided that cards in a closet aren't helping you achieve them, then keep watching. Obviously, there are no guarantees on how much you'll make as the cards and pricing fluctuate wildly. While this process worked for me, that doesn't mean it'll work for you the same way. This is an educational video. Take what you like and use it to make the best judgment you can, but nothing here could be taken as any kind of promise, guarantee, or whatever, and I bear no responsibility for any outcomes or lack thereof. I'm telling my story only. Enjoy. The first thing, of course, is to find cards worth selling. The TCG Player app is good for that. If you open the Scan to Collection screen, you can rapidly scan a card, check the prices, change versions if they don't get it right the first time, and then sort them into piles. I generally split them into under $30, $30 to $70, and $100 plus. Keep in mind, if it says NA for the price, that usually happens because those cards are too rare and they don't have any data, and that's usually a good sign. So put that in the check later or 100 plus category for now. Then, for lower cost cards, I put them away to sell later or mass upload on TCG Player instead, but for the expensive stuff, I stick with eBay. Here's my process. First, get good photos. I always take a minimum of 4, front, angled back. I take a few others for bends, nicks, or other details that I'm sure somebody would want to see. The key here is to not look like some boring stock photo somebody pulled from somewhere. You want them to see that you are a real person selling a real card from your personal collection. And here's a pro tip. I like to take photos of a bunch of cards all at once and sort them into folders based on their name and condition for easy posting later. Anyway, the next step is to look on eBay for that same card in the same set. This not only helps me see what other people are actually selling it for, but also what the supply is, which might affect what I price it at. I pick one with the closest title to what I'd want and then click Sell One. Doing this fills in a lot of information for me, though you always want to verify any autofill details to be sure. Regardless, the first thing you're going to do here is upload your photo set. You can drag and drop, or in this case, I'll just browse the computer for it, but either way works. I'll always change the title to fit the style that I tend to use and check any other details that it had put in for me to make sure that they are accurate for the card that I'm selling. When you get to condition, you want to make sure to make your best guess and trend low if you have to. Don't exaggerate. The TCG Player condition guide is pretty decent, and the eBay levels are fairly descriptive too. Since you're selling it on eBay, prioritize their descriptions over anyone else's. Regardless, about the description itself, there are legalities for what you say here, so what I'd recommend is some boilerplate text for all my cards that works for every card. In some cases, I might add specific condition details or something else, but usually the boilerplate is fine. Some important things you'll want to include: the fact that you are not a professional grader and you're not making any guarantee, and they need to check the photos for themselves. You should always reserve the right to cancel if you are not confident in them as a buyer, if they have no history or a lot of bad reviews or whatever. So next you need to figure out what to price it at. When you looked at eBay before, that'll give you some idea, but I like to check MTG Goldfish because it gives you a couple of different prices from the major websites. If the numbers are pretty close to what I expected, I'll tend to use that for my high and low range, but if they're completely different or missing entirely, I'll click into TCG Player and check the other cards to see what people are selling them at.
compare to other sites like Dropbox, and try to get an all-around idea of what this should be. Once I have a good idea, I click Buy It Now and put the high-end price in, but I put a reasonable auto-accept value of 80% more of that price, and then I'll put in a pretty low minimum offer value. And the reason for that is because sometimes cards have gotten cheaper over time, and I could have gotten a good offer if I hadn't been so strict. So I keep that really low, and then if somebody sends me what looks like a lowball offer, I'll check the prices again, and if the market has fallen, I might accept it. If they are just screwing with me, I'll refuse them or maybe send a counteroffer, but the point is I have more control that way. For shipping, I always do free shipping. It's psychological, but it's sensible, especially for high dollar cards. As I was once told by a high dollar shipper on eBay, speed is important for expensive items. So if I ever send expensive cards, I use a priority flat rate mailer. And the reason for that is it's easy to calculate and it doesn't matter the location. Fun fact, priority mailer envelopes are free and can be grabbed in bulk at the post office. Again, don't be a jerk, just take a handful at a time and no more. If the card is lower value, I'll send it standard mail instead, but still free. I did spring for some simple padded mailers, which are very brightly colored, so they're harder to miss if they fall off a belt in transit somewhere in the UPS or whatever, or USPS. For many legal reasons, I disallow any overseas sales and just stick with US states. I don't want to fill out a customs form. I don't even want to deal with the legalities there. So just keep it simple. When you're starting out, it's a good idea to preview every post to make sure everything looks right. If you haven't already, check that the photos clearly show the condition and aren't out of focus. Then it's just a matter of posting and waiting. And waiting is key. Every several months, I might look at the cards and reprice them, but I generally don't stress and let the cards fall where they may. Supply and demand shift, so don't get too caught up in trying to constantly chase the trends. As soon as it's posted, I put the cards in a top loader hard sleeve and store them until they're sold. Note that buying the top loaders is well worth it to keep them safe because, like the mailers, you're talking less than 20 cents per card. I put links to both in the description. Once you have a buyer and it shows as paid, you'll need to print shipping. If you don't have a printer but you've got a lot of cards to sell, it might be worth getting a cheap laser printer. A renewed one should be fine, especially if it's a more trustworthy brand like Brother. The one I'll link probably won't be around for too long, but finding a cheap one that clearly states it has a starter cartridge somewhere in the post shouldn't be too terribly difficult. For example, this one is under $100 and can print 700 pages, which will probably do you just fine. You can package everything up at the post office instead, but it's a pain and you get a discount doing it through eBay. So, whatever, as long as it works for you. When you're ready, click to purchase the label, and as soon as that transaction's done, click to print it, and now we package. For cheaper cards, I use an envelope, like I said. In this one, I didn't have the pink ones yet, but you get the idea. I just cut out the label and the insert, add a little cardboard, put it in, tape it up. When I ship priority, the process is much the same, though I tape the card to the slip to keep it from coming out the top and to limit movement in transit. You can also add some cardboard, which I will usually do for more expensive cards, but it's not really necessary. I've never had a problem. So what about the safety factor? There's always a chance that somebody will claim the card never came or that the package was empty. What do you do then? Well, what I do is I take a nice crisp photo showing the card, the buyer, the address, and the packaging, and then I show another with the package at the post office in the box. Granted, that's not going to keep somebody from claiming that I took the card out and mailed them a bag of Cheetos or something, but the picture plus tracking seems to be good enough for eBay based on the policies, and I've never actually had someone challenge me on a low-value card, so I figure that's good enough. But when it comes to the high-value cards, I definitely feel like that needs a little extra, so here's what I do about that. So eBay has this thing called the authenticity guarantee. Keep in mind, it only works for single cards, and they have to be sent to a non-PO box. But when it does work, what eBay does is auto-change the address to go to their authentication service. They verify that the card details on your post matches the card that was shipped to them, and then, if it does, they release it to the buyer in a really nice-looking box, by the way, and everything's cool. You basically get a free grading service and repackaging service. It's pretty neat. So far, they're not charging for the service, but even if they did, It saved me thousands of dollars in one case because of fraud. I forgot to check the buyer's history, and they ended up being a scammer, claiming that I hadn't sent them the card at all. eBay only asked me for photo evidence, and I could have just sent them a screen capture of the boxing video, but instead I sent them a photo of their own guarantee pointing out that they had already validated my card, and that was that. So what about cards you're selling in sets or otherwise can't use the authentication service? Just a moment ago, you might have noticed I said something about a boxing video. Well, for these situations, I will actually video the entire packing process, clearly showing the card or cards with one unbroken video where I seal the box, draw a pattern on the seams, which I then tape over. It's a little anti-tamper trick I picked up along the way. And I've never had to use one of these videos, but when you take photos of the item being dropped at the post office and the markings all match your sealed video, and you've got this video in the first place, you've got some pretty strong evidence if you ever needed it. At the least, it's not especially hard to do, and it makes me feel more comfortable, so that's good enough for me. But that's not all. Another thing you can do is make sure to send the photos of the packing and the shipping to the buyer, and then watch the tracking. Once it arrives, and before they've had a chance for any sort of buyer's remorse or a sudden bill to give them funny ideas, send them a message that says, "I see it arrived. Great. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did." What you're looking for here is for them to respond with anything that sounds like, "It's great. Thanks so much." If for any reason they were tempted to claim it was missing or damaged later, this becomes the final piece of evidence you need to disprove their claim. That's not to say there aren't legit disputes. Maybe there was a minor bend you missed, or you misread the version. For example, somebody pointed out that one of my listings that said Alpha Red Elemental Blast was actually a corner-clipped beta, which is easy to prove because one card is listed as an interrupt and the other is an instant. If they hadn't caught it before I actually sold it, I would have refunded it as a damaged beta instead, or accepted a return, which I normally don't do. Obviously, you're doing your best to not be taken advantage of, but that doesn't give you an excuse to be a dick either. Anyway, that's basically it. Once you've listed it, it's free. It stays there forever until it's sold, or you mess with the prices to match conditions, or change your mind and pull it down and sell it somewhere else. Whatever you want to do. But this process is what let me escape the anxiety of having all these expensive, fragile crap in the house and trade it in for a promise that I'd made to my wife nearly 30 years ago. So that's my story, and I hope yours goes just as well.